Welcome, poker players, people that play poker, players of card games. This is Navanata, No Limit Hold'em, Namaste bitches. So today we're going to talk about moving from online poker to playing No Limit Hold'em live. I'm going to be doing this quick foray into the world of live poker as it compares to online poker because one of my students and friends of 2 or 3 years now, is making at least a potential transition. He's taking a foray into the world of live, low stakes, no limit hold'em. I think we're starting with $1, $2 NL at the local casino. He's going to take a shot at it and has never played live, no limit hold'em ever. Pretty sure. He has played maybe once, at least once, but maybe only once. But it was a limit game. It was a long time ago. Basically, just a strict online grinder. Has been putting in a lot of volume for the last few years. A lot of experience, knows what he's doing. Heads up specialist, kind of. Yeah, back and forth from 6 max fast fold to heads up. And he's so he's going to be making a hopefully triumphant foray into the live arena. So he was asking for specific advice about this transition and what to expect. And so I think the first thing is we want to figure out what to expect from our opponents. And there's this long-standing debate, I guess, about who's better, live or online players, which I think is hilarious. But it's close, right? It's close. It's not close. But first we have to define what we mean by better. Of course we have to define that. But if we mean by better, having an understanding of game theoretical concepts, kind of higher level strategy stuff, the ability to think in equities and ranges, and to understand things like merging a range or polarization, bluff catching, taking lines that make some semblance of sense, that could potentially win money or not lose so much against somebody on the planet. If we mean that, if we mean the player who's playing starting ranges and starting hands by position in a way that is not reminiscent of somebody who has some sort of emotional disorder or mental handicap, or is inebriated to the point of being unable to say their own name, or if we're even just talking about the ability to have higher level brain function enough to say things like hello, my name is such and such, and the ability to spell, let alone play poker, then I would have to give the edge to the online players by a lot, by an immense amount. It's not even remotely close to close. Like, even if you take an NL10 player online compared to a 2-5 player live, it's still not remotely close. I don't think the top 10%, if you take the top 10% of your local live card no limit hold'em game, and you put them into online games at the micro stakes, like literally $5 micro stakes online games, if the top 10%, if they're not regularly playing online, then when they go and play online, they're probably just going to get murdered. There's just, let alone if you compare the same stakes, like a 200 NL grinder online compared to a $1, $2 regular at the casino is a hilarious joke. I mean, it's really just, forget about it. It's a dumb thing. If you think, and I know there's still this weird, I guess, debate about this, but if you actually think that it's still like, I don't know, 2000 or 1999 maybe, and the players online are not as good as the players at the live games, I think that was true for 5 minutes in like 1999. You haven't played online in a long time, or you just haven't played live, and I mean, what it's like, and this was really the question, like, what can you tell me to prepare me for this? What's going to happen? What's it going to be like? The best analogy I can say is like it's like taking a time machine and going back in time and playing poker in in the year 2002 BC, against underdeveloped cavemen, right? No, it's like going back in time. It really is. It's like going back to an earlier day when people had not a clue what they were doing. They're really, really awful. I mean, it's fun to say, and it's fun to be like, go team online, and all of that. But I mean, it's just like it's truer than it's more true than you could reasonably be expected to guess or imagine or even believe before you see it with your own eyes. I mean, it is atrocious the ways that these players will attempt to seems like attempt to give you their money. But it's like everybody's rushing in to give you all of their money at the same time. So they interfere with each other's ability. And they end up like taking your money by mistake a lot. There's a lot of variance in these games. That is one thing. If you're used to playing, even just one table, but let alone 4 tables at a time, and you're playing 100 tables an hour per hand, or 100 hands per hour per table, it's like variance. You think you know variance, but you really don't. If you're playing NL25 on 4 tables, compared to playing, $2, $5 NL500 live on 1 table, the swings are absurd there because the variance can't wash out. Like, variance washes out over time. The more hands you play, the closer your EV adjusted win rate and your actual win rate start to get to each other. Eventually they converge, right? It just takes a while. Well, when you're playing live, it takes a long, long time. I mean, I've talked to, one of my old friends, actually I started coaching him. First guy I ever coached, as a matter of fact. Well, first guy I ever took money from that I coached. And he eventually became kind of a friend, and we just started trying to figure poker out together. He is no longer playing full-time. He also had some other hobbies that were not as lucrative that ended up wrecking his bankroll. But he's got a good job, So anyway, the number of people that he knew on a first name basis that would come into the casino, and he was playing 2-5, and run like God for a month and quit their jobs, because they're making $40 an hour, but he knew they were bad players, and to watch them just go absolutely belly up in the next 6 months. I mean, it's double digits, and it's got to be, 13. I bet you I would set the over under at 13 people he's told me about that he specifically knew who did this in, probably a span of 3 or 4 years at one casino. And I'm saying that because that shit can work in reverse too. You can be a $20, $30, $40 an hour winner and lose, $10 an hour for 2 months. This can happen. And if you play long enough, it will happen. So you've got to be prepared for the swings. I mean, they are so terrible that the analogy I want to use is this, okay? Online, if you have pocket aces and you get all of your money in, you're probably getting it in against one player, right? Okay, so this isn't part of the like. I'm not saying that live you're going to get all of the money in against multiple opponents with pocket aces. That doesn't happen really. Pre-flop it's not an aggressive pre-flop situation. What happens is post-flop people get very, very sticky. I mean, they're sticky pre-flop too, but they're not going to give you the opportunity to stack them with aces because they never 3-bet, let alone 4-bet. But the analogy is going to be a good one, so hear me out. I should bring up Flopzilla. I'm not going to, though. I want to keep this quick. So the online version would be like having pocket aces and getting all in against one player. So you're going to win the vast majority of the time, and you're going to double up when you do. You know, assuming you're gonna double whatever you're risking, right? I mean, what do you like? You gotta be 80+%, right? Like you're 80% against so many hands, um, and you've got some in even worse shape. I'm trying to think if anything has considerably better equity than 20%. I don't think anything does. So yeah, you're going to be more than an 80% favorite, but you're only going to make twice. You know, you're going to just double your money. Now, the online version of that would be if you have pocket aces and you go all in pre-flop and you get called by 4 players. So now what's your equity? Well, I mean, you're not a favorite. You've got a huge edge, but you're not a favorite. Like, if you have 4 opponents, you might be, depending on what exact hands they're holding, let's just keep the math simple and say, even if you're, I don't know, 30, well, let's say you've got 3 opponents. No, let's say 4 opponents and you're at 50% equity. Which, you know, might be something like correct. So let's say in both situations, we're talking about $200 stacks. So in the first situation, your EV is 80% of, well, let's make it, let's keep the math simple. We're playing 2-5. Okay, so let's say $500 stacks. So if your equity is roughly 80% of $1,000 when you get it all in against one player with pocket aces, then you could say that you own about $800 of that $1,000 pot when the money goes in. So that's your equity. That's what you're going to make on average in the long run. But what if you have 50% equity against, you know, 4 players? Well, now if your equity is 50%, but 4 times 500 is 2,000, your equity stake in that pot is $1,000. But where before you were losing 20% of the time, now you're losing 50% of the time. So that's kind of what's going on when you play live. So your EV might be $1,000 instead of $800, but the variance is higher. Like your risk of ruin in one of these experiments, if that say is your entire bankroll, your risk of ruin is like 20% online versus 50% live. So you see how that can work? Like you're swapping variance and volatility for EV. You're making more dollars per hour in the long run, but the long run is just much longer. And you know what to expect from the brick and mortar opponents is honestly expect them to be worse than you can imagine. It's like if you had a time machine and you went back to like the year 2000, that is honestly what it's like. You know, again, like AD. You know, no, I mean it really is. It's like before there was any good poker literature and people were limping in their speculative hands and raising their big hands and 3-betting queens plus an ace king. You know, I mean that's the game. That is pretty much it. They are all kinds of bad. Now that's not telling you much though, right? Just saying, hey, these players are bad doesn't tell you how to adjust or how to beat them. It just tells you, well, I mean, I guess it suggests that if you played something approaching game theory optimally, then you're going to have just a huge edge just because your opponent will not be anywhere near mirroring or mimicking your perfect strategy. But you know, that's not how you want to play. When you're playing live, you want to exploit the piss out of these guys. But in order to know how to exploit them, you have to know what they're doing wrong. And instead of just giving you guys a rule, well, a list of rules, or a chart or something like that, I think the better thing to do would be to try to understand like where these guys are coming from psychologically. You know, like what is their buildup? What is their makeup? And you do have skill sets that you're able to bring in that you don't have access to online. You can look at people's faces and you can see how they're dressed and you can see how they talk and you can see if they look comfortable and how they're, you know, you can take that as far as you want. You know, people that say that the whole game is about reading your opponents when you're playing live are full of shit. people that say it doesn't matter, that's ridiculous. I mean, it absolutely matters. I mean, I've put the vast majority of my time volume in playing online, but there's no doubt that I've put the vast majority of my dollars in, dollars in volume, I've put in live. So I've got a lot of experience in both arenas. Um, there is no doubt that these live reads are crucial and critical. And really all you have to do is just pay attention and you'll see it. And just don't level yourself and don't bullshit yourself. Like if it looks like a duck and it smells like a duck, so on, right? So where are these leaks and problems? Why are they bad? Why are these people playing so bad? Well, I think there's four main places. They're just coming from ignorance. They just haven't read the books. They're not online, so they're not on the forums. They're not running HUDs and looking at software. They're not analyzing hands. They're not combing through databases. They're not doing any of that. They're also not playing nearly as many hands. I mean, if you're playing even 2 tables at a time, I don't know, 5 hours a day for 10 years, the speed that those games move, you just got like 50, 60 years worth of live experience, in 10 years. So guys that have played online for 10 years are probably as experienced as the oldest veterans, but they're sharper. But ignorance, just lack of having those tools at their disposal. But also, ignorance can be, it's caused by just not knowing the answers, not knowing things. It's blind spots. But a lot of times with certain segments of the population, and for whatever reason, the live poker cash games seem to be a hotbed for this type of person. A lot of times it's the hubris of that individual that keeps them ignorant because they don't want to do the work. They don't want to believe. It's their egos. They don't want to believe that they're bad. They don't want to think that these aggressive maniac kids with their stupid computers and it's just hubris. It's like and they're unwilling to accept that what they've been doing and polishing for years and years is anything but great. And they just so they become superstitious to account for the fact that they're losing players. It's like even after they lose for decades, they still cannot accept that they're bad at poker. At that point, instead of facing the fact that their strategies are antiquated and dated and just not correct, they will actually change the way that they think the universe works at large, rather than accept that they don't know something. So they become superstitious. That's what you'll see an awful lot from these skeptical, jaded, woe is me, haven't hit a flush draw since 1974 live regulars. Insecurity is a major player in this game. And you think it's tilting to lose a big pot or to do something kind of dumb and get caught, like playing heads up online or something like that. Like, oh man, this guy that I play with every once in a while online, he knows my screen name, he knows I'm from USA, and he just watched me do this super dumb thing. I called down the third pair because I thought my opponent was bluff heavy and polarized, and you think that feels bad? Try that when there's 8 people watching. It's a rough thing to go through and put yourself through. So I think what happens with these bad players is they huddle up in these groups and they're like they're administering and putting themselves through this form of what is the term I'm looking for? It's confirmation bias, right? Like they're hanging out in these like echo chambers where they all just take turns saying the same thing that they all already think is true, and then they agree with one another. The thing is that they're wrong, and have been since '02. They don't want to. None of them wants to be the guy that puts their neck on the line. It's a boys' club. These guys hang out. They know each other. They punt buy-ins off back and forth and trade money. Maybe some of the retirees are there 5 days a week, 6 sometimes. Sometimes, yeah. So you get this weird protect your hand and bet for information, and I wanted to see where I was at, and all of this nonsense gets built up, and then it forms like a closed loop. It's an ecosystem that's closed off from the rest of the world. Nobody questions it, and nobody dared disagree with it because, well, and nobody's got reason to disagree with it. You know, for all it's not like there's some guy that comes in there who used to play online that was a heads-up master, just starts just beating the shit out of them. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess that is what happened in Vegas in the high stakes. Huh. So there you go, buddy. I was gonna say your name, but I won't. Um, Maybe you can do that in Canada. You can be the Vegas of Canada. You can be the Vegas of Canada. Hmm. Wow. A weirder sentence was never spoken. Indifference. And I don't mean the indifference principle, so calm down there, poker nerd. I mean these people are just indifferent to losing $100. They don't care. You know, they're retirees, they're, you know, rich business owners. The 1-2 game or the 2-5 game, if they're not running anything bigger than 1-2 or anything bigger than 2-5 at the casino, you will find a bunch of guys there that are simply having fun gambling, and they really don't care. You know, it'd be like you playing poker with some 10-year-olds, and they're playing for $5, and holy cow, you know, that's their week's allowance, or $10, you know. That means a lot to them, but they, you know, you don't care about losing. In fact, you know, it's fun, whatever. Like you wouldn't care a bit, right? To lose $5 to a 10-year-old. I mean, I did that just yesterday. I was had a bet. It was an arm wrestling match. And, I mean, how was I to know? She didn't look so strong, you know. No, but really, this indifference thing. People are just indifferent. They don't care. So they certainly don't care enough. Like mostly they don't. A lot of them don't care enough to even try in the game. You know, they're just joking and having fun. They certainly don't care enough to like buy a book and read it, let alone hang out at the forums or hire a coach. God forbid, watch poker videos or join a training site. Forget about it. So how would you fare against yourself if you played poker against the old you before the old you ever started watching these videos or hiring a coach or reading any poker books? Because that's who you're playing against. But probably dumber versions. Almost certainly older versions. Which isn't always a bad thing, but I'd say on average is, right? We don't go uphill. We tend to go downhill after a certain number of years. And a lot of the players or a lot of the people that are going downhill, or, well, I guess what I want to say is it turns out that at the bottom of that hill there's a 1-2 game. I'm telling you, these games, if you can weather the variance, and I'm going to give you some clues on just how to do that, these are very lucrative situations to be in. Don't let people convince you otherwise. These games are so beatable that it's absurd. But you just can't play the same game. See, a lot of these players are like, oh, you can't win. It's all luck. It's not all luck, and you can win. What you can't necessarily do is weather the variance playing a style like you'd play online. That's going to be very high variance. You raise to 3 times the big blind at a 1-2 game, and you're going, you know, 6 ways to the flop. Do you know how to play poker 6-handed? Does anybody? Are you sure that you have an edge against players that have been doing it for the last 20 years? I mean, even if they don't understand poker, they've seen a lot of flops 6-handed. Have you? Like, what if you have king queen and the flop comes queen 9 8, and you've got 3 opponents, and the first one bets and the second guy calls? What do? You've got one to act after you. Who the hell knows? How good is one pair 6-handed after a guy bets and a guy calls? I mean, it shouldn't be good, but you just don't know. But we're going to address that. And the other thing is, of course, the lack of control. People just are not controlled or disciplined, and they go on varying levels of tilt. But people want to act like there's just tilt and not tilt, but it's not like that. It's a spectrum. And I would say that my A game is so much better than my F game, but my B game's not so far from my A game. Well, when you're playing poker at the casino, you're playing against guys who are at their A, B, C, D, E, and F game. I don't think most of us even have that many games. You know, it's like we've got where we're playing as good as we can, then we've got that but tired, or you know, that but not firing on all cylinders, hungry or distracted a little bit. Then we've got like autopilot is our B game, and then we've got full-blown monkey tilt, and that's about it. But there are other levels of tilt, and you're going to encounter them because people are going to leave from an argument that they had with their wife and go to the casino to blow off steam. People are going to be drunk at the bar and get a good idea. They're going to go play poker. None of these things happen. Like, you're not going to get drunk at the bar and like, I'm going to go home and play some poker on my computer. And you're not going to get in a fight with your wife and go to the other room and play poker. Like, you're not going to storm into the house, right? So there's a lot of ego going on. There's a lot of anger and insecurity and emotional this and that makes people do very irrational things. And my advice to you is that you should really do everything you can to be in a position to exploit and take advantage of the suffering and emotional catastrophe of your fellow man. It's, I would say, in some ways, your civic duty as an American or as a citizen of the universe to liberate, to liberate American or international currency. It's been imprisoned for far too long, and we need to liberate that currency. Anyway, understanding psychology, I mean, you've got to have a good basic strategy for poker. There is no way to replace that. You're not going to go to the casino and win at poker because you've got a master's degree in psychology. It doesn't work that way. That said, once you do have a basic understanding or a pretty solid idea of what a good poker strategy is, you understand a thing or two, you know what ranges to play from what position, and you know you're decent. If you're approximately breaking even at NL10, then all you need to do is get a couple of pointers and start to think psychologically about this game, and you can go directly to the casino and play 1-2 and take $20-$30 an hour off the table immediately. I mean, you know, in the long run. I mean, you'd have a win rate probably $10, $20 an hour if you're a break-even NL10 player, with just a couple little tweaks to your understanding. But it's highly volatile. There's a lot of variance. So you have got to be able to keep your shit together. If you tilt, if you're a big tilter that gets super irate and punts off buy-ins on the regular, you can put in enough volume to make up for that occasional buy-in punted off in anger if you're playing online. But there's just not enough hours in the day to do that. You can't punt off $500 to the 2-5 game and then just grind it back by working an extra, what, 2 days? Who's got an extra 2 days? You know? Like, if you're making $25 an hour, which is a reasonable and very achievable win rate at a 2-5 game, if you're making $25 an hour and you punt off a buy-in, and you just got stuck for 20 hours. Did I do my math right? It's pretty simple. So look, let's talk about the ways that players make mistakes, and specifically, okay, because I don't want this to be an hour-and-a-half long video. Maybe we'll do more about the psychology another day. Tell me if you like this kind of video, and I'll do more of it. Let's do it that way. Seriously, if you want this to end up being what I do for a while, I could talk about the transition from online to live poker ad nauseum. I have just got way too much to say about it. But the main things are, the sizings are ridiculous. Like, people will literally open to $15 in some 1-2 games. And it's rare to see them open for less than $10. You know, I would say the average raise size at 1-2, and I've played in Las Vegas, Cleveland, Canada, Detroit, Toledo, and I've played at the 1-2 games in all of those places. And I'm going to say the average 1-2 games open raise size is probably $10 or $12, probably $11 on average. And there's a lot of limping, so I would say like after limpers it's something like the average might be something like 12 plus $2 per limper. So the average actual raise is usually an ISO raise, and it ends up being, I don't know, on average it'll come in for like 15 bucks, something like that. If you sit down with a $200 stack and you're able to raise to $12 on an open, to 3-bet to $36, to ISO raise to $15 or $20 off a $200 stack with a super tight range against players that don't know what on earth they're doing, how hard could this be? So your opponents will size way too big pre-flop, and they'll let you size even bigger. They'll let you get away with it, so you should. You should size enormously with a tight range and go to the flop with a positional advantage whenever possible. Play tighter in early position with a bigger raise yet. But you want to be playing a very tight range with very big bets. And, you know, if you can, I don't know, if somebody raises to 12 and a guy calls 12 and another guy calls 12, and you can make it $60 pre-flop and get one caller and a bunch of dead money in, and you've got $180 behind and $180 in the pot, and you've got aces, how hard is this game? Really, think about that. Or even if there's like limp, 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 and you, well, if it's limp, 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 ISO to 15, and then you come in for a 3-bet against the ISO to $45 and get called by one player, so there's $100 in the pot. What did I say you made it? 45? Yeah, there's $100 in the pot. I mean, even if you've got 150 behind, or 160, or you won a couple of sets of blinds or something, maybe you're up, maybe you've got 200 behind, maybe there's 100 in the pot. Like, how hard do you think this game is when you have king, queen of diamonds, and the flop comes out jack of diamonds, 3 of clubs, 2 of spades? You c-bet to half pot when you're bluffing, and then when you pick up a draw, then you can go off or whatever, or check back, or we'll talk about the specifics at some point. But you can make these like half pot c-bets that just print money, because your opponents are not check raising light. They're just going to play fit or fold if you can get them heads up. And when you ISO to $25 with king queen suited pre-flop in cutoff position after 5 people limped in, your opponents are not folding queen jack suited. They're just not going to do it. They're not going to fold king 10 suited. They're not folding king jack offsuit. They're not folding any of that stuff. They're just not going to do it. A lot of them won't fold king 2 suited, you know, because they have a suited king. You know, hey, everybody else plays their suited aces. I just expanded my ranges a little bit, you know. Like, they do this stuff. If you can make a very small stack to pot ratio with a bunch of dead money in the pot, and when you raise, you can do it with a relatively wide, I mean, it's a very tight range I want you to use, but relative to the raise size, like big raises should accompany very tight ranges. But you're able to raise super big in a way that you wouldn't be able to get action from worse hands if you were playing against good players online. If you have a hand like ace 10 suited or ace jack or king and queen, pocket 9s, pocket 10s. But if you stick with like 8s plus, king queen suited, ace jack suited, ace queen plus most of the time, and you come in with monster raises, guys, these dudes are not folding ace 5 suited. You raise to $20 and somebody has ace 10 suited, you think they're going to fold, you're out of your mind. It's not going to happen. They will not do it. They won't do it. So you get a stack to pot ratio of 2.5 going, and you've got your opponent's ranges dominated, like just dominated, literally dominated, where they have so many hands that share a card with you, and then when they hit, they're going to make a good second best hand super often. They're going to try to set mine you. They're going to try to play suited connectors against you when they're getting dick for implied odds. It really is this easy. They size too big. They allow you to size bigger. They play inelastic. That means they're either going to call or they're not, almost regardless of the raise size. And most of these guys are going to overcall with the same range that they would call with. And sometimes even wider because they justify it, and I mean even post-flop, by saying, well, I was going to call with second pair, but now this guy bet and that guy called, so now my call is even better because now I'm getting better pot odds. I shit you the fuck not, guys. This is who you're dealing with these 1-2 games. I shit you not. If one player limps and a second player limps and a third player limps, you know the fourth player is limping because he's getting 5-1. It's such a joke. And the guy in the small blind is flicking it in 100% of the time. 100. He's not folding anything if everybody limps in because he thinks he's getting like 10-20-1. It's like, if that's the way that pot odds worked, guys, then we could all limp in and just share all of the profits. That's not how pot odds work. That's not how pot odds work. They're not positionally aware. They're too loose, too passive, imbalanced in every way possible, and they're not paying attention. They have no awareness when it comes to position or balance. So here's some specific things you can do with that information. Value inject everything, no bluffing. Like, you only take like C-bet bluffs and the most pristine double barrels on earth. I mean, like, heads up, you can C-bet the flop against 1 or 2 players. I would say if you've got 2 opponents, you're usually going to need some kind of backdoor equity at least, or like at least a couple of overcards. I want, most of the time against 2 players, I want a discombobulated flop and overcards, or like a backdoor straight flush draw. You know, it's got to be pretty good for me to take a C-bet bluff into 2 opponents, because they don't account for the fact that you should be betting a tighter range, so they defend with the same range regardless of whether they, and even if you bet into 2 players and the first guy calls, the second guy probably calls about as often, or even sometimes more often than he would if you were heads up. So what that equates to is your bluffs are not nearly as good multi-way, because these players don't adjust for the number of opponents in the pot, but they do adjust for pot odds. Okay, so if you just only take C-bets heads up, or when you've got really pristine spots, they print money, because these players are inelastic. So that means that you can bet half the size of the pot when you're bluffing and get about the same number of calls or folds as when you bet 70% of the pot when you're not bluffing. How do you lose? You know, the only way you lose is with variance, and the only way that you have a ton of variance is if you go there and you start raising to $6 in a 1-2 game and let like everybody come in except for the bad hands, the really bad hands that would have limped in. So the way to get around that is you want to ISO raise really, really big. You want to open raise huge. You want to squeeze monstrously. And you want to bring limping into your game. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. When 2 guys limp in and you over limp with your like suited connectors, and especially nut value hand, like nut potential hands like ace-x suited and pocket pairs, when you overlimp those hands, even if there's a really good player to your left, which if there is, change tables or move seats, what is that guy going to do to exploit you? He's going to start isolating you and the other 2 guys that already limped in, that are definitely fish, that aren't going to fold to him. He can't do anything. So you can use those guys to protect your overlimps. They can't punish you for it. So overlimp. Overlimp. So you only have basically 2 things you're doing. You're either going to put in a couple of dollars with a pocket pair or ace-x suited, or like stronger suited connectors. I don't want to play like 7-6 suited. At some point, you get to the point where reverse implied odds, if drawing to second best draws, overtake the implied odds. And when you have 5 players in there and deep stacks relative to the size of the money that's in the pot, like big stack to pot ratios, the reverse implied odds are going to not be on your side when you have a hand like 7-6 suited. Most of the time. It's not the same as like calling one player's raise and being able to float the flop and steal it on the turn, or check raise the turn and overbet jam the river when you miss. None of that's going to play. So you can't play these like synergistic combos hoping to semi-bluff and float and double barrel and you can't do that. So you really just want the hands that have good nut potential and your best synergistic hands. And like, because you want your equity to be chunky. You don't want to be playing this game where you have queen 10 and flop top pair against 4 players, because you don't have any clue what to do, and you're going to make so many mistakes, FTOP mistakes, fundamental theorem mistakes. What you want is to hit or miss. You know, I mean, if you flop like the nut flush draw, you're going to be able to play that profitably. You're not going to make a bunch of mistakes with that. Flopping second pair is not the same. Flopping top pair with a weak kicker and a 5-way pot is not the same. So limping in with these hands that have really good nut potential, chunky equity, like Queen Jack suited is probably good. Jack 10 suited. You know, your suited Broadway cards, where if you're drawing, you're probably drawing to a big hand, not like drawing to the ass end of an 8 high straight. Not drawing against 4 players, 4 opponents, drawing to a 7 high flush. You don't want to be in that spot. So play the hands with high nut potential and good synergy as your overlimps. But ISO huge when you've got 2 big cards, when you have good domination, good frequent strength. You want to dominate your opponent's ranges. That's what the name of the game is. When you're able to raise to, like, seriously, 10 times the big blind, when you're able to go 10x, the name of the game is, I want to have top pair top kicker or top pair second kicker when my opponent has top pair whatever kicker and can't ever get away from it. And also, I'm going to be prepared to value own myself the 1 time in 12 my opponent flops a set when we have a stack to pot ratio of 2. You feeling me? He can't possibly hope to beat you. They're not going to do it. But if you get in there and you raise like you would online, or you just play the same game everybody else is playing, the variance is going to be too much. And a lot of you are going to lose. You know, a lot of you will win too. But the other problem is there won't be a huge correlation between whether you're winning in EV and winning in real life. And that's a dangerous thing. That's a dangerous thing, especially if you've got, I don't know, pro poker play as a goal, or something that you'd like to do. I think that pretty much does it. And Beluga theorem is the God's truth, guys. Don't call raises with 1 pair hands. I don't care if it's aces. If you bet the flop with aces, bet the turn with aces, and get raised, you're beat fold. So get used to taking bet fold and raise fold pre-flop lines. Don't be a hero. Your opponents are not polarized, especially when they're out of position. They don't know what that means. When you raise pre-flop and they call from the big blind and the flop comes king 7 deuce and they lead into you, they're leading into you because they don't want to check and call, and they don't want to check and fold, and they don't know what to do, and I'm out of position, fuck it, I bet. You know, I mean, it's seriously something like that. They don't have check call ranges. Honestly, a lot of times, a lot of players on a lot of boards will not check and call. So anytime you and I would check and call, they're just going to lead, probably small. And they're not polarized then. They're like merged. They're even like the opposite. Some of their donk bet ranges will be like donk bet for 30% pot, and now they're making a bet that is actually taking the poles away from their range, and they're leading a capped and bound range. Think about that. They're disgraceful. But you can't hero call. Like if they donk the flop, donk the turn, and donk the river, you can't call second pair because you think that they only have the nuts or nothing. It's not going to work that way. Some players that you get at the casino against playing 1-2 will play that way, or 2-5 especially will play that way in position. They'll have polarized ranges in position, especially when they bet the river. But they're too out of position, they're too emotional. And everybody there is so worried about getting outdrawn that they bet for protection. Really what they do is they value on themselves over merging all over the place. But they do it because they're so scared of losing a pot that they could have won. It's all about the psychology of it. Just think about, if I didn't know how to play poker, what would I be doing this with? You know, something like that. And don't level yourself. And guys, don't do bet flop, bet turn, and shut down on the river. Don't do that. Bet the flop, one and done. Because these players play fit or fold on the flop. They don't float. They don't peel. They don't check raise light. They don't do that stuff. Very, very rare. Now, sometimes you'll catch a perfect card to barrel the turn. It's going to be an overcard. It fills one of the straight draws. It's an overcard to the board. It fills a straight draw, and you just picked up a backdoor nut flush draw, and you're just like, I just have to bet. That's fine. If you get heads up with your bet on the flops, you're going heads up to the turn, and you can bet that turn and get some folds, but this guy calls, that's fine. You're going to hit your hand sometimes. You'll have locked up equity on the turn. You'll build a bigger pot for the times you hit. You'll build a bigger pot for the times you bluff your opponent off. But you have to follow through with that third barrel on most runouts. Like, don't double barrel unless you're willing to triple barrel as a bluff. Because they play fit or fold on the flop. But once they call the flop, they're not folding the turn very often. They're super sticky. Even if a scare card comes and you bet and they have second pair on the flop that's now third pair, and there's now 3 spades on the board and they don't have one, they're still going to call one more time because they think you're betting the scare card, especially if it's an ace. So that's fine as long as you're willing to triple barrel. Trust me on this one. Don't really try to avoid betting flop as a bluff, betting turn as a bluff, and shutting down. Go one and done on the flop against one opponent or in pristine conditions, and only double barrel the perfect turns against one opponent who can fold, and only do so if you're going to triple barrel bluff. The vast majority. I mean, of course, you've got to use your own, I'm not at your table, right? But you've got to apply some common sense and whatnot. I think that's going to do it, guys. I feel pretty good about this video. Hopefully that helps. Hopefully that helps somebody out there to take advantage of drunks and degenerate gamblers whose lives maybe aren't going all that well. And make sure that you're there to help them out and take some of their money off of them. That's how you that's how you do it. That's how you do it. Oh man, I think I felt like I was on a roll. I was going somewhere, and then I just couldn't come up with the punchline. It happens sometimes. Can't be funny all the time. Number 1 rule: keep your shit together. Keep your shit together. Don't do anything stupid. The first time you feel yourself doing something stupid, and you know it's stupid while you're doing it, you're done. You must leave immediately, because whether you realize it or not, you have just entered tilt land. And man, live poker is tilting. It's tilting. So do your meditating before and after. Pray to whatever particular deity or spiritual, incorporeal deity body that you feel is appropriate. And above all, Namaste, bitches. Remember ace pre. And don't do anything stupid. Pay attention. Know that they're not paying attention. And till next time, guys. Good quote. Luck. End quote.